Hello and good evening. My name is Brittany Rogers, and I want to thank you for taking the time out of your Monday evening to attend our class on facilities and common area maintenance and reserves. I also want to thank you all for volunteering to serve your community. Being a board member is a true statement of your dedication to your community, and we appreciate all of the work you do. Just a few housekeeping items before we get started. Throughout today's presentation, all participants will be muted. This will assist with any unnecessary background noises and disturbances. So if you do have any questions, our Director of Team Development, Tabitha Burrill, will be answering any specific questions through the Microsoft Teams chat. Your community manager will also be a great resource to follow up on any additional association-specific questions. Finally, we will also post Brian Farley's contact information in the chat box, and he is more than happy to answer any questions after tonight's presentation. For those board members who were unable to attend tonight, we will be recording this training, and your manager will be provided a copy of the recording for any board members who request to see it. So again, my name is Brittany Rogers, and I'm a community manager with Diversified Association Management, and I have been managing communities for a little over 6 years, and I have a portfolio of various building types such as condos, single family, and townhomes. Presenting with me this evening, as I said before, is Brian Farley with Association Reserves. Brian is a reserve specialist who has experience in general contracting and carpentry, and he has completed over 1,500 reserve studies for a variety of different communities, from condos to commercial properties. So as I said earlier, Brian and I are going to be talking about one of everyone's favorite topics, spending money, or rather the items that cause us to spend money. We will be diving into the surface level of facilities maintenance, learning how to find the association's maintenance responsibilities versus homeowners' responsibilities. Then we'll be heading into gathering the information on projects and when is best to use operating or reserve funds. And then we'll be talking about planning and prioritizing the day-to-day items as well as the reserve items. And we will also discuss what capital components are. From there, Brian will take over to teach you about what a reserve study is and the dreaded consequences of deferred maintenance. So let's put on our floaties and jump on in because we have a lot to cover. Some of you might be thinking, I live in a single family community, and as a homeowner and board member, I maintain everything on my lot. Why am I even here? Though it may be limited, every association has maintenance responsibilities, and I mean every association. Some associations may only need to maintain just the mailboxes, while others have to maintain a whole building. And no matter how hard we wish for it not to be, maintenance costs money. In that same breath, there's also a lot that the association does not have a responsibility to maintain. Rather, that responsibility falls on the owners, or in some cases, the city. In addition, you as a board member have a fiduciary duty to act in the best interest of your community. Sometimes that means making the tough call to say yes to homeowner A, but no to homeowner B, or making the call to repair the potholes first before painting the buildings. So as a board, where do you draw that line between fulfilling the responsibilities of the association and making sure you don't throw money where it doesn't belong? The best news I have for you is that line is already drawn. In your governing documents, more specifically in your declarations or CC&Rs, as those terms are interchangeable, it lists out both association responsibilities and homeowner responsibilities. Now, I understand that declarations are written by and just full of all that lawyer talk, whereupon there shall be within rights, yada, yada, yada. Please do not let that intimidate you. This is one of the many areas that Diversified has your back. As community managers, we have experience in reading and understanding these documents, and we also have resources to contact if we can't find the answers ourselves. All of this is to help make your life a little easier, so you can keep your dusty dictionary on its bookshelf. One document that's also forgotten about is your community's plat map. Did you know that the plat map not only shows boundaries between homeowners and association property, but it will also define city-maintained portions such as the streets and sidewalks? Sometimes the plat map will also state little specific things of the association will be responsible for Tract A or will be responsible for the snow removal on Tract B. Diversified has a copy of almost every association's plat map. So if you're interested in seeing the map for your community, contact your manager. If by chance we don't have it, we can easily obtain a copy from the county as it is a public record. And finally, I want to bring up another tool called the maintenance matrix. As you can see here on the screen, a maintenance matrix is a table that shows what is maintained and insured by both association and homeowners. So looking at the picture, you see a lot of A's and a couple of O's. A obviously stands for association, O stands for owner. It essentially simplifies and clarifies what is being stated in your declarations. If you're interested in creating a maintenance matrix for your community, I recommend contacting your community manager and they can help get that process started. Now that we have our handy dandy 150-page declarations or maintenance matrix, we can begin to list out what the association is also responsible for. One thing to keep in mind is that every association is unique. So that also means that the maintenance responsibilities are unique as well. No two associations, as similar as they look, are the same. Next, we want to plan out if these items want to be paid out of your operating or out of your reserves. So I know you're probably thinking, we still have to spend money. Why does it matter where it comes from? There's quite a bit of difference between the two accounts. Your operating expenses is what you use for the association's day-to-day operations, whereas your reserves is like a savings account for when you want to plan for a major project or for, knock on wood, when something major breaks. It could also be for just general replacement, a general full replacement of capital components in your community. What is a capital component? I'm glad you asked. A capital component, or also called capital improvement, is basically anything that is built into the community. Buildings, streets, mailboxes, roofs, gazebos, fences, etc. Basically anything maintained by the association is a capital component. So if everything is a capital component, how do we know what account to use when it comes to repairs? Let's just go through some examples. You're walking through the community and you happen to notice a downspout is loose and is hanging improperly from the gutter. The rest of the gutter system seems to be in good shape, no major leaks. The cost to reattach the downspout is about $300. And this is typical, and this tends to be typical with regular maintenance of your gutter system. So we would want to pay this out of your operating account. Now, let's say you're walking around your community and you notice a lot of the paint is chipping away from the buildings. Overall, the color is really faded, and it's not that nice hot pink that it used to be. I said hot pink because I wanted to make sure I still have your attention. Anyway, you begin to get proposals and learn the cost to paint each building is about $30,000. That is not exactly chump change, and it's definitely something you would want to come out of your reserves because it's something you would typically save for, and it's not a daily maintenance item. Another example of operating versus reserves, let's say you're in a condo community who has a shared water heater system, as much as those are awful. You get a call from an owner who says she's not getting hot water to her unit. You send a plumber out and learn the valve to her unit is not functioning properly. Since valves tend to go out on a regular basis, this is most likely an operating expense as it's a typical maintenance item. Now, as the plumber is leaving, the hot water heater breaks entirely. Where do you think that money is going to come from? If you said reserves, you would be right. Now, I could share examples all evening, but for the sake of your time and sanity, I won't. So we have the association's honey-do list, and now we know what you're responsible for. Where do we start? It's good to gather information from your regular contractors, such as your landscaper, or if you have an on-site handyman. Also, take advantage of your association's portal, portal.diversifiedprop.com, or the website that your association pays that domain for also leads to the portal. As a board member, you can review all work orders that have been submitted, even completed already for your association. This will assist you in seeing trends and potential areas that may need more than just a quick fix. And finally, don't forget about your community manager. We are another excellent source of information. Believe it or not, your community manager does a lot more than sending nasty grams to the homes with violations, as hard as it is to believe. We as community managers are continuously receiving education and further training to be a better resource of information for you and your association. Have you ever heard your manager say, "I noticed this on my site visit," or "I'm meeting with your landscaper during my next site visit"? Seeing a trend there, the words site visit? Almost every diversified contract has a set number of site visits for each community. Though the term is pretty self-explanatory, there's a lot more to a site visit than just visiting a site and giving your manager a chance to catch up on their tan. We actually use this opportunity to assess the property. We will take this time to try and look for needed repairs. We look for things like damaged gutters, warped siding, cracked sidewalks, the list goes on. Now, that doesn't mean that we automatically create work orders for everything we see. If we did that, you guys would have no money. But we do take notes and pictures, lots and lots of pictures. Honestly, I have so many pictures of fences and potholes on my phone, I could probably sell them to stock photos and retire. But we do this so we can help make sure that we address the issue, the immediate repairs, and to help you plan for future larger projects. And as I said before, we also take this time to meet with your contractors, such as your landscaper, to plan for seasonal projects. Or we'll meet with a contractor who is preparing a proposal for a specific project, such as painting, asphalt work, etc. We will gather the proposals needed for both the day-to-day and the major projects. Now, one thing I do want to make note of, I know I said proposals for day-to-day projects. This does not mean that we get a proposal for every time a light bulb needs to be changed or for every fence picket that needs to be added. If we did that, the association would never get anything done. Then what do? We take a look at your annual budget and our contract. Now, when you have time or are suffering from insomnia and need something to read to help you sleep, take a good look at your diversified contract. You will see that your community manager has a spending limit for day-to-day maintenance items. Unfortunately, it's not for shoes. Having this limit not only saves us time for both manager and board, but it also helps us take care of minor problems quickly so they don't turn into major ones. Now for the budget. Though it seems like it's just a sheet of numbers that tells the sad story of why the association has no money, it's actually a very important tool that helps ensure the association is fulfilling its duties to the homeowners. Utilizing your budget not only helps you understand the money that you have now and have planned for current day-to-day items, but it will also help you understand what you will need to change or plan for in the future. Your manager will often refer to your budget when submitting work orders or even submitting requests for proposals. Additionally, the manager will use your current annual budget to create the future budget. We look for variances and patterns so we know how to help you plan your finances for the next year, which unfortunately can mean increasing assessments. Another tool you may or may not have heard of is the reserve study. I hope you're all paying attention to these terms I've been throwing at you because you are going to get quizzed at the end. I'm just kidding. I actually hate quizzes, unless they're the fun ones that tell you what dog fits your personality type. But back on topic. A reserve study is essentially a planning tool. It tells you your financial position, how much you should be contributing to your reserve account, and a rough cost to replace each of your capital components. Furthermore, Diversified has access to industry professionals like Brian Farley, who can help the board plan and prioritize the maintenance aspects within the community, which I believe is a perfect segue to hand things off to Brian, who's going to go into a lot more detail about reserve studies and the consequences of deferred maintenance. There will be a brief pause as we switch presentation screens, so we appreciate your patience.
All right, can you all see my screen okay?
I can see your screen, Brian.
Excellent, thank you so much, Brittany. And I will say I will not be as comedic as Brittany, as she has a much better sense of humor than I do, but at least she set the stage for me. So I really do appreciate that. And I also want to say thank you to you all. You guys are taking the time out of your day, your night to better serve your community. That's a huge deal, right? Not everyone is going to do that. So you've basically already shown how much you care for the success of your property's finances and the success of your property long-term by just being here. So we're gonna take about 15 to 20 minutes to go over a reserve study and what a reserve study can do for you. Now, as Brittany already mentioned, what a reserve study is ultimately, it's a budgeting document. It's a budgeting document that helps you understand what your reserve needs are for your association. Now, Brittany already mentioned your operating expenses. Your operating expenses and your reserve expenses make up your dues. So every month you're going to be paying into your dues structure for your homeowners association. And so you'll say, well, what does that do? Well, there's a bucket for reserves and a bucket for operating. Your operating, those are things that are like month to month, day to day. Think about that as your landscaping or your water bill or your gas bill or your management fee bill, right? Your reserves are going to be the just as predictable expenses, but that occur on a longer term time frame. Think about painting, think about roof replacement, think about gutter replacement, right? Those are longer term time frame issues. Now, the thing with your operating expenses, if you neglect to pay that, let's just say you forget to pay for about 3 months your water bill, what's going to happen? Well, your water is going to get shut off, right? Or if you don't pay your manager for 3 months, they're not going to show up to work anymore for you because they need to get paid. Whereas if you neglect to pay for your roof bill for 3 months, nothing really happens. And if you keep on neglecting that year over year, nothing happens until you need to replace that roof. And then guess what happens? Only one set of ownership has to pay for the entire deferred maintenance, meaning the entire time, that 25 years that we expect a comp shingle roof to last. If you're not putting away that money diligently every single month, only one set of ownership that just happens to be unlucky at that exact time has to pay for the entire expense. So ultimately, that is unfair. And that's what a reserve study is trying to avoid. We want every single owner, regardless of when they happen to live at a property, to pay their fair and equitable share of the deterioration costs of the property while they live there. That means every single owner, if they live there for 1 year, they pay for 1 year's worth of deterioration at that property. If someone lives there for 10 years, they pay for 10 years worth of deterioration of the property. So when we think about reserves, think about it in the here and now. So when you're talking to your ownership and say, well, we need to fund our reserve account because our roof needs to be replaced in the future, or if you say our painting needs to be done in the future, what's going to happen is you're framing the argument to be somebody else's problem, not your problem. If you say, well, we've got to do this in the future, they're going to say, well, that's a future owner's responsibility. That's a future board's responsibility. Whereas if we say, you need to pay your fair share of the deterioration while you live here, it then becomes my responsibility if I'm living there. I go, okay, I need to put away my fair share of funds to take care of the roof that I'm using while I live here, or I'm driving on the asphalt. I need to pay for my fair share of usage of that asphalt. So again, what is a reserve study? It's here to take care of the ongoing deterioration costs of your property. It is not a future budget or a cash flow budget for the future. It is a budget that takes care of today's needs, and it helps you offset the annual rates of deterioration so that you can successfully plan for your association's expenses. Now, what is the law in Colorado? Is there any law or any legislation today in Colorado that states that you have to have a reserve study completed? And if you read this, no, there is no legislation today that requires you to have a reserve study. The only requirement is that you have a reserve study policy. And your reserve study policy could state that maybe you don't even have a reserve study completed. So think of it this way. Is there any law that states that you must fund your retirement account? No, there's no law whatsoever. But guess what? It's probably in your best interest to put some money away to plan for your retirement, because you probably don't want to work until you're 102, right? Not that we may get there, but you see what I'm saying? We have to be diligent and prudent when taking care of our association's finances, because as an owner, as a board member, you have a fiduciary responsibility to take care, maintain, repair, and replace the common area assets of your property. So then how do you figure this out? How do you know what you need to do? And how do you even know if your association even has enough money, right? Because the question goes, well, do you have enough money in reserves? And you say, yeah, I think we do. We have about $500,000. That sounds like a lot of money. That should be enough. But then I say, well, relative to what? How do you know if you're financially healthy? So the way you answer that question is you need to get a reserve study to actually answer that question for you. Do we have enough money? If not, how much money do we need? And then where do we need to go from here, right? Where are we today? What do we need to do? And then where do we need to go? So that's what a reserve study is going to tell you. And so if you get a reserve study completed, you need to make sure that your reserve study is completed with regards to National Reserve Study standards. It needs to be in compliance of National Reserve Study standards. Personally, I am a credentialed reserve specialist through the CAI certification. So every single report I complete has a stamp on it. And so why is this important? It's important because you need to make sure that the person who's completing your reserve study is actually professional. It's not just someone who drove up to your property, popped their trunk, and says, I can do a reserve study for you. You need to make sure that your reserve study can stand up in court based on the National Reserve Study standards. So again, if you're going to get a reserve study done, or if you've had one done in the past, you need to make sure that it is done in accordance to National Reserve Study standards. That is super important when talking about reserve studies. Now, jumping into the meat of a reserve study, you're going to see 3 key results in every single reserve study. There are 3 key results when you purchase a reserve study or when you have a reserve study completed. Number 1, it's going to tell you the component listing. What are the common area assets at your property? What are you responsible for maintaining? What is at your property? How much of those assets are there? Number 2, the reserve fund strength. This is where we establish whether or not an association is financially healthy or not. And then lastly, the funding plan. How do we go to where we need to go? How do we go to a safe place? How do we know that we can go to a place where we're not going to experience problems with finances? So starting off here, the component listing. So the component list is when a professional reserve study provider will go to your property and itemize all your assets. Typically, this is done with an initial meeting on site or meeting via Zoom, whatever you prefer. And we go over the aspects of your property. Essentially, we act like a sponge to understand every single thing about your property. And then we're going to go on site and take a look at all of your assets. And so why are we doing that? Well, we need to establish these 4 criteria: description of the project, the useful life of the project, the remaining life of the project, and then the replacement cost of the project. So description being, hey, what kind of asset is this? So let's say I go to your property and I see you have a roof. So it's a roof replacement project. What's the useful life for this roof? Well, it's a flat roof. Typical useful life for a flat roof is about 20 years. So it's a 20-year roof. The remaining life, it was replaced 2 years ago in 2020. Therefore, it has a remaining useful life of 18. And then the replacement cost, the current cost, not the cost it was, nor the cost will it be when it needs to be replaced, but the current cost in 2022. What's the current cost of replacement for this asset? So if we go through every single product at your association, we get something like this. It's going to show all the assets at your association. As you can see here, that roof example, we have a roof replace. It's a 20-year useful life with a remaining useful life of 18. And its current cost estimate is $80,000. So as you can see here, the roof replacement and the cost show us the scope of the project. It's a roof cost, or excuse me, it's a roof replacement project for $80,000. Whereas we have the middle portion, the useful life and remaining life, showing us the schedule, how often this project will occur. So your roof replacement project will occur every 20 years with 18 years remaining. However, take a look at this schedule, right? What do you guys see here? You see that all these assets, they fail at separate times, right? So by nature, reserve expenses are unequal. Not every single thing is going to fail exactly when you want it to fail. Sometimes it's going to fail sooner. And then also some of the costs are going to be very unequal. I mean, take a look here. Whoever happens to live at this property within a 5-year time frame or 7-year time frame is going to have two $80,000 expenses. So it's actually very unequal when these projects occur. So if you're not planning ahead properly, it's going to be very costly for a certain sect of owners. And so if you actually graph it out, you're going to see here, this is what it looks like. So if you're not properly putting and diligently putting funds away, essentially you're going to move into the property. Let's say you move in 2016 and you're going to say, okay, well, I know we had a $500,000 expense. So as long as we should have $500,000 in reserves, that should cover us. And then you go through the next 5 years and you go, yeah, we don't even have any expenses. And then, oops, we have a $500,000 expense. Okay, good thing we had that money saved up. And then you move out in 2025 and you say, you know what? I lived at this property for almost 10 years. I had no issues with HOAs. I don't know why they get such a bad rep. It's perfectly run. They're run just like just great. It's run like amazingly well. Okay, so then someone buys in, and let's say 2029, and they say, well, I was told we only need $500,000 in reserves and we should be fine. But then the next year they get a $2 million expense, right? So that's the problem with reserve expenses. They're inherently unequal. So rather than just waiting for this expense to occur and then special assessing or getting a loan to cover this cost, rather we're going to equalize all of these costs over the entire life of the property so that every single owner pays for a fair share. So even in 2015, you're already covering this cost because you had a reserve study and you already knew this was going to happen. So you put away money as soon as you started this property up. As soon as it was built, you started putting funds away diligently. Okay, so now that we've covered the component list, we're going to go to the reserve fund strength. And so the reserve fund strength, this is what's going to tell us whether or not your association is in a financially healthy or financially unhealthy position. And so the way that we do this is by using this terminology that we call percent funded. And so percent funded is the difference between your reserve fund. So essentially, what do you have in your reserves? What's liquid in your bank account versus the value of deterioration. And so value deterioration is just a simple straight line depreciation calculation that we utilize. I don't want to waste your time going through it. It's very simple, but it's a straight line depreciation calculation. So we do that for every single component at your property. Then we take the difference between your reserve fund and your cost of deterioration, and we get your percent funded. And so what does percent funded tell us? So we take the two, we divide them together, and we figure out that your association is, let's just say, 10% funded. So what does that tell us? Why do we care? Well, we know now, statistically speaking, that your association will be at a high risk of special assessments or deferred maintenance or other cash flow issues. Whereas if we do the same thing, we find out that your association is 80% funded. Well, now we know, statistically speaking, your association is at a low risk for special assessment risk. So percent funded, think of it as a health measure. Just like you get your blood pressure or your cholesterol levels measured at the doctor, that's going to tell you whether or not you're at a high risk or a low risk. Percent funded is the same thing. It is just a statistical measure of risk for your financial health. So again, what we find is that when clients are at 30% funded and below, they're at a much higher risk. You can see it gets almost up to 60%. So essentially when a client's 30% funded or below, the risk jumps up to almost 60. 70 and above, there's a less than 1% chance risk of special assessment. So essentially, associations in this area have a nominal risk. And this data is over 70,000 reserve studies that our company has completed. So this is a big range of data. But what's the average, right? That's the question we always get. Well, what's the average? We want to be average. We want to be at least a little bit above average. Well, interestingly, as you can see, 30% of all the associations in the US are well-funded. So it's actually not impossible to be well-funded. And in fact, it's actually fairly normal. So 30% are well-funded, 30% are poorly funded, and about 40% are in the medium area. So it's kind of like a normal bell curve. So what does this tell me? It just tells me that it really is possible to be well-funded. And in fact, it's fairly normal. And most associations are very capable of doing this and should be doing that, right? Okay, next. What are some of the issues, though, for the associations that are in this part of the graph? What do we start to see here? Well, there's a lot of risks with being poorly funded. And I actually want to explain to you in these next couple slides how actually funding your reserves ongoing, again, treating your reserve as a bill, rather than waiting for your roof to be replaced to then pay for it, putting money aside now every single year until it needs to be replaced is actually the cheapest, most affordable way. It's going to keep more money in your owner's pockets, which is going to make everyone a lot happier. So I'm going to make a couple arguments to show you exactly why reserve contributions, again, predictable, ongoing, expected, transparent reserve contributions are the cheapest and most affordable way to take care of your property. So the number one issue that we see is deferred maintenance. So deferred maintenance, this is when you have a board meeting or an ownership meeting. You say, we need to paint our wood siding. And then it goes, well, it's too expensive. We don't want to do this. We're going to wait till next year. So then next year, bring it up again. Well, we're going to wait till next year. It still looks okay. So that is called deferred maintenance. You're deferring a project for another year. Now, the problem with this line of action is that deferred maintenance will only become more and more expensive. So for example, just ask yourself this: would you have rather have done a project in 2019 or in 2022, right? Much would have rather done a project in 2019. It would have been a lot cheaper, not just because of inflation, but because now we have labor shortages, supply chain issues. Every year is unpredictable, right? So we would highly encourage you to take care of your property soon while you can. These are projects that just should not be deferred, specifically protection projects like painting or asphalt sealing. So you can see here, this is an association that deferred their asphalt sealing. So they said, we don't want to seal our asphalt. It's not that critical to us. It just makes everything black, and we don't really care. That gets our tires all black, and it gets, we don't want to do it. Well, what happens if you neglect to do an asphalt seal is it actually tears apart your asphalt. Think of it as asphalt seal as like a sunscreen for your asphalt. And so what started to happen with this client is they neglected to do it. So they started seeing a little bit of potholes, and then water got in there and trapped it. And then, as you can tell, in like the last 2 days, we've had like 30-degree weather, then 70-degree weather. So that's massive amounts of freeze thaw. And so what happens is it explodes out the asphalt, and then it starts to destroy the subgrade. So now an asphalt seal coat project for this community would have been 20 cents a square foot. And their asphalt, how they'd done it on a predictable basis, their asphalt would have lasted them about 25 years. But now, because this client has neglected to do both of those things of just seal coating, regular maintenance, their asphalt is now going to cost them almost $6 a square foot, and their asphalt's only going to last them 15 years. So they lost 10 years, and then over like 10x something their costs. Again, because they just decided to defer. So deferring this project increased the costs and shortened the life of their component. So that was a bad choice for this association. It cost their owners more money to defer this project than to just do ongoing contributions. Now, another problem we see with poorly funded associations is it actually lowers their property values. So the reason we put this together is a huge kind of pushback we get is, hey, if we, from boards, is they say, hey, if we increase our reserves to the point you say, well, no one's going to want to buy in our property because our dues are going to have to go up, and no one's going to want to buy in here. So we actually ran the data to figure out if this is true. And this is over, I think, 20,000 samples. So we figured out, based on our database of percent funded versus the for sale values that we've seen on the market, we found that a well-funded association actually increases the resale value of your home. So why is that? Is that because they're looking at the reserve study saying, I'm going to pay 12% more? Probably not. But what happens in a well-funded association? They don't look like this, right? They don't have potholes everywhere. They don't have things falling apart. They don't have siding that looks like that. They actually have things that are taken care of. When a potential buyer goes into the property, talks to the neighbors, they don't get told about a risk of a special assessment. They don't talk about how the board meetings are insane because no one can agree on anything and there's lots of arguments all the time. They say, no, actually, I don't notice anything. Everything just gets done on time. It's very smoothly, just like a business. And it's a nice place to live because things get done. So a well-funded association will actually, again, increase the property values and then, again, put more money into your owner's pockets. Now, another problem with poorly funded associations is, again, it's going to cost them more money to do more projects. Okay, so if you have a 15-year roof, okay, just a 15-year roof with 1% interest, which we can get right now on high yield savings accounts, over 15 years, a $250,000 roof is going to cost you about $231,000. So savings of $20,000 with just those boring old reserve contributions. If you special assess, it's going to actually cost you now $20,000 more to special assess. Now, if you get a loan, it could cost you up to 90 to more now because interest rates have gone up. So what's the argument here? If you're relying on a special assessment or loans, it will indeed cost your association more money, even with nominal interest of 1%. Again, budgeted reserve contributions are the cheapest and most affordable way to take care of your property. Okay, another issue is mortgage difficulties. FHA, they require that 10% of your annual budget goes into reserves in order to achieve FHA approval, so that essentially you can have a wider pool of buyers that can go into your neighborhood. However, before I go too deep into that, I would like to remind you that just because FHA, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac say 10%, that's not adequate. Typically, a well-funded association puts away about 25% of their total annual budget into reserves. So just because, again, FHA says 10%, that's not adequate. 25% is actually the right amount to put in. However, if you're not even putting 10%, you're not going to get a wider pool of buyers into your association. So your property values will most likely go down relative to other associations that have FHA approval, because again, there's going to be more demand for that association with the better lending terms. Okay, the last one is liability exposure. So if your association, let's just say, passes a special assessment and you have an owner who potentially can't pay, he could sue the association for negligence, for not essentially taking care of their property. And therefore they could get special assessed, not only to cover the roof, but to also pay back this homeowner who sues the association. It's a horrible situation. And I'm not saying this will happen, but just understand that there is a fiduciary responsibility for the board to take care of their property while they live there. Okay, so now we're kind of wrapping up here. What do we do next, right? So we've talked about kind of the bad parts of reserves and underfunding reserves. And so again, my argument there is well-funded reserves, just putting money into your reserve account, boring, right? That is actually the smartest way to run your association. It's going to save your association the most amount of money, even though it may not seem that appealing to owners to say, well, why am I putting money away today for a roof that won't be replaced until the future? You just have to continually remind them, you are paying for your share of usage while you live here. It is the fair and equitable thing to do. You decided to live in an HOA, therefore those are the rules of living in an HOA. Okay, so last what we're going to talk about is the funding plan. So what is the funding plan? Again, it is the way that we say, here's where you are today, and then here's where you need to go tomorrow, so that you can be in a well-funded position, having a low risk of special assessments, deferred maintenance, and cash flow deficiencies. And so what we try to talk about is, as you've heard me say before, we want to pay the bill of the association. We want to pay the bill. So just like you have to tell your owners to pay the bill for the landscaping contract, for the management fee, these are the bills that they understand very intuitively that they have to pay, or else they won't get those services. But when we talk about reserve expenses, it doesn't work that way, right? So we try to frame it as, well, there's a reserve expense and there's a bill you have to pay in regards to that. And that's your monthly reserve contribution. And so then what is the adequate amount of money to put away? Well, you need to get a reserve study to actually tell you exactly what you should be putting away. However, what we found is typically a well-funded association is putting away about $3 to $5 a day per unit. Okay. And so I put up here Starbucks. So why did I do that? Well, if you go to Starbucks, I think it's actually more now than $3 to $5 because of the inflation stuff, but it's a cup of coffee, right? If you can afford a cup of coffee a day, you should be able to take care of your property. And the argument I have here is, look, you may not want to buy a cup of coffee a day. That's totally reasonable. I understand that. But you can, right? If you live in an association, most of your homeowners can pay for a cup of coffee a day. So how much more important is their home, is their association, the place where they made probably the biggest purchase of their life to live in? It is worth it. It is worth taking care of your property. It is worth investing in the property. It is worth investing in for the future to make sure that more and more people can enjoy your beautiful property. And again, it's only $3 to $5 a day. Okay, so now I'm going to show you for these last 2 to 3 slides quickly how to essentially read a reserve study quickly. So I've mentioned some of these things on my presentation, but what a reserve study is going to tell you is this right here. Number one, what year is this report created for? What is your reserve account balance, and what's your current fully funded balance? The current fully funded balance, remember, that's that value of deterioration I talked about. So we divide those two together and we find out that this association is 16% funded approximately. So they're very poorly funded, right? They're in a bad position. And so what do we recommend? Well, unfortunately for this client, we had to recommend a special assessment, right? So we recommend a special assessment, and we also recommend a slight increase in their reserve contributions. So just in less than 5 minutes, we were able to establish pretty much all we need to know about this association. So that's what a reserve study is going to do. A reserve study could be up to 100 pages, but truthfully, you can read almost all the information in a reserve study in less than 3 minutes. So if you haven't had a reserve study completed, you need to get one completed. It's extremely important. How do you even know where you're going? It's like going on a trip without a map. How do you know where you're going? Or it's like planning a vacation without knowing where you're going. You need a reserve study to help you establish, where am I going? What's our endpoint? Where's our north pole, right? Where are we actually going to? And so that's what a reserve study will help you do. It helps you point you in the right direction so that you can responsibly and efficiently fund your reserves to take care of your property, so that everyone will be taking care of their fiduciary responsibilities. So lastly, this is my last slide. Number one, you need to have a reserve study completed. If you have not had one completed, get it completed, right? Get one and hire a reserve study professional to get it completed for you. Or if you have an older reserve study, and I look at old reserve studies, anything older than 3 years. Because think about 3 years ago, that was before COVID. And so a lot has changed since then. So all of your data is no longer even relevant. All those numbers have changed, all the costs have changed. So update your reserve study constantly. Number two, you need to offset ongoing rates of deterioration. This is not a future budget. This is a today budget to offset today's deterioration as it occurs today. Ultimately, the boards are responsible. It is their fiduciary responsibility to enhance, maintain, and replace the assets at their property. So therefore, they have a fiduciary responsibility to do those things. Reserve expenses are inevitable and predictable. You can't just say, wow, I did not know our roof was going to fail. It just happened overnight. No, remember, over 20 years, that roof was failing every single day. Therefore, there's no excuse for not being prepared for a large expense. Reserve expenses will only get more expensive when they're deferred, right? Again, we've seen this now in the last year or two. Not only will just deferred maintenance cost more, but inflation is going to get you, other unexpected things will happen and occur. So therefore, the longer you wait, just understand that the more it's going to cost. And then lastly, owners are going to have to pay the cost one way or the other, right? So the argument is you're going to either have to pay in lower property values, you're going to have to pay in deferred maintenance, you're going to have to pay in special assessments and loans, or you're going to have to pay with ongoing reserve contributions. So our argument is ongoing reserve contributions are going to be the cheapest way to take care of your property. So that's it for me. Thank you so much for letting me be here again. I do appreciate it. I will then make sure that I have Brittany step up and say goodbye to everybody or questions, whatever's next.
Thank you so much, Brian. And yeah, just to kind of brief little summary over everything that we just spoke about, we do understand that we threw a lot of information at you guys, and it sounds a little scary talking about deferred maintenance. I know some of those pictures gave me the heebie-jeebies, but just remember, everybody, Diversified has your back. Brian with Reserve Studies, Association Reserves also has your back. So, this is just to kind of show you guys everything that will just help you prepare for the future. So again, I want to thank you all for attending, and I want to take this time again to thank Brian Farley for your incredible presentation on reserve studies. I also want to thank our office manager, Brittany Murray, I'm Brittany Rogers, for completing the setup of this training, and thanking Tabitha Burrill for answering questions in the chat feature. And finally, I just want to give another shout out and thank you to you board members. Without you guys, there would not be a Diversified. And so we appreciate everything you do for your communities. So thank you and good night. And then just one more quick reminder is that this was recorded. So if you do know of any board members who wanted to attend tonight but couldn't, just let them know. We will have a recording link that we can send to you guys. This presentation was about 45 minutes, so super easy to watch during your free time as well. If you guys have any additional questions, please do not hesitate to reach out to your community manager, and again to also Brian Farley. Thank you, everybody. Have a great evening.